It all started with the question of whether or not we're real. But every day we wake up and we try to deliver excellence operationally through AI tools and through best practices that were learned from the heart of the BPO industry, where excellence in service is the thing. It's really the factory of service that we leverage to deliver the excellence that both our remote professionals feel and our clients feel through our data, through our processes, and through our training. And the future is bright for Kayana. Whether you know we exist or not, we will be there tomorrow, we will be there next month, and we will next year, because the opportunity for training and developing talent all around the world has never been brighter. And in that regard, Kayana is just beginning.
We are at the nexus of something greater. This is our story about building a remote-only company that spans the entire globe. This is the future of business, technology, and global remote work. You are watching Discovering the Possible.
So let's start by looking at some of the headlines that live on Reddit that talk about our company and whether we're real or not. The first one is, "Hi, is Kayana legit?" This is in a Reddit forum called Virtual Assistant PH. This is for virtual assistants in the Philippines. And people actually don't know if we're real or not. And I think that's absolutely hilarious. And it's partly because we're new. And there are companies that are much larger than us that are a little bit homogenizing in the way they approach business or the way they talk to people. And people are just not accustomed to people talking directly to them in the way we do. And the other ways this shows up, and there's a channel called Buhai Digital. This is actually one of the largest channels in Reddit, where remote workers are talking about the different agency platforms like us. And you can see someone asking about our company, "Have you ever worked for?" And of course, there's some people saying, "Yes, I have," and so on and so forth. And again, it shows up, "Hey, any particular insights on these people?" And so this is a daily and weekly task that we go through to let people know that we're for real. And not just that we're for real, but that the guy coming up on TikTok Lives is actually a real person and he really wants to solve your problems. In fact, to demonstrate that, I actually started reading through the comments so that they can know that I'm reading the comments and it's not some AI doing it. You can imagine, while I'm really proud of the fact that we're treating people in an important and valued way, and it makes me really proud, it's also incredibly gratifying when someone rushes to our own rescue and kind of tells their own story. It's really boils down to like human skepticism, and this is a very natural thing, because I think a lot of people in life have been burned. This is especially true in the remote professional space, where it's messy and people's career profiles are confusing and clients can be unpredictable. That's why I'm confident that Kayana will be here for a really long time, because these sorts of problems don't work themselves out overnight. You really need someone to validate the clients and validate the remote professionals, so that relationship that you get is legit, and that the biases and the skepticism that comes with the possibilities of working with remote professionals is validated. And as Kyrie Pruitt, the PhD, perfectly stated, if we have a cognitive bias, we may interpret information based on our own beliefs and experiences, and sometimes the ways that we interpret the information may or may not be accurate. In today's session, we're going to dig into the cognitive biases that drive some of these senses of skepticism. But let's get a few things straight. Where do these things come from? Where do these things come from? And it's not just on the remote professional side, it's also on the client side, which makes our job doubly difficult. For example, if a client has already hired a office assistant at $35 an hour, and a US-based virtual assistant's $20 an hour, it might seem like $15 an hour seems impossible. And so if you look at the average salary of US back office personnel, the average wage is, if you were thinking of a bell curve, around $20. So when we're talking about remote professionals that are top tier remote professionals, and we're sub 1% in what we're vetting here, if we are coming in and talking to you about 15 and 14, which is the lower end of the curve, and saying they're better than the $25 an hour people or the $26 an hour people you're hiring, or even $40 an hour people that you're hiring, it's hard to believe. And this is actually what they call the paradox of price. So paradox of price says that people expect to pay more for a better thing and to pay less for a less good thing. And if you offer them something better at a lesser price, they don't believe it. It happens to be the most remarkable business execution you could find when someone's offering something better at a lower price. And that's in fact what we do. But life has trained them to think that's not possible. And so unless I wildly increase the price, which would affect our ability to deliver on our promise, they're not going to believe us. Another cognitive bias is when a founder believes that an on-site work setup is more productive than a remote work setup. I have talked to many venture capitalists about the spend that they're currently executing on in technology, many of whom are spending $1 million, $2 or $3 million or more, because they need to find the Silicon Valley, California developers, because those are the good ones. But if it's not them, it's the New Yorkers. And if it's not them, it's the people in Boston. What they don't know is that, and this is really get messed up, because I could say, why don't you go to Britain? They're 50% less. And once I get them to Britain, then I said, why don't we go to the Philippines and we can get them for 75% less or 80% less? Sure, there's scams out there, but if you're dealing with people that are bona fide in the industry and know how to navigate, you can avoid the pitfalls that would otherwise reinforce some of the skepticism that comes with this. Ultimately, cognitive biases are a very personal thing. We all fall into certain types of traps, but depending on our background and the experiences that we have, we can fall into one more than the other. So for something like skepticism, which can stem from a mix of cognitive distortions like overgeneralization or all or nothing mentality. Like, for example, scams are too good to be true, so therefore all great opportunities are most likely schemes or fraud. Gosh, I've fallen into that one a million times. Or I cannot be productive when working remotely, so therefore no one else can work productive when working remotely, which is basically the bias of every CEO and president of many different companies here in the United States, where we've got to work in the office because I need to work in the office. It doesn't mean it's true. Just because you think and believe in this skepticism that's admittedly helped you survive and succeed the way it has, it doesn't mean it's actually accurate. And this is where sort of cognitive dissonance happens with other people on your team when they don't have the same skepticism or the same biases that you do, which of course makes it a really interesting conversation for me when I meet people in these moments of skepticism. How can I prove it to them? How can I demonstrate where they might be wrong? And that's one of the reasons why we offer trial as part of Kayana services, is because it's a bit like Costco. If I can let you test the product, maybe I can help you understand where your skepticism is wrong or when you might want to rethink things. Not all skepticism is bad. And I think it's important to remember that these cognitive biases exist for a reason. They're survival skills and you need to have them. But maybe it's worth answering a few of these questions for the people out there, and why Kayana is for real, why we're legit, and maybe put some of those things to rest. First of all, who's behind Kayana? So Kayana was founded by me, and it was born out of a need I had. Now, the way I uncovered that need was a simple statement, which is, if you don't have an assistant, you are the assistant. It's inescapably true that if I am doing the lower level administrative tasks, I am probably misallocating my time. And not only am I misallocating my time, I'm probably misallocating my energy. And so That actually was the birth of the Kayana business. The naming for the Kayana business was actually a collaboration between my first remote professional and myself. And she came up with the name Kaya, and we did some trademark search. And then ultimately, we were working with a copy editor out of LA, and they added "na" at the end. And we realized that this is actually the holy grail of naming, because it took the can-do attitude of our organization and what we wanted as our brand, and we added some immediacy to it. And that sort of immediacy really made a difference for us. So another question people ask is, why are we making offerings to people in the Philippines that are just better than what competing agencies are offering? And that's actually a pretty low bar. And the reason is because I think the competing agencies have two problems. One is they don't understand the client and what they want. They don't want cheap and okay. They want good value. They want someone who's great and is also inexpensive relative to the value they create. So in understanding that, our positioning around our business and our pricing has always been one that puts the value first, not the cost first. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to, in a way, represent the talent. And we wanted to put them first because we knew that if we had great talent, that we'd be able to get the clients that valued that great talent. The clients, in a way, became the easy part of the equation if you have the great people to start with. And so if you have those great people, which is why we focus on them and why the brand is Filipino facing, we knew we'd get the clients. And that is a marketing strategy that none of our competitors took. But the world's a crazy place, and there's a lot of people that represent themselves as credible when in fact they're not. And so the question is, how do you judge an agency as legit or not just by the offers that they make? And that's really hard. And it can't just be that. It turns out, I think, that the way for an agency like ours to really establish themselves is by doing hard things well. And what's really hard in today's day and age is actually building out an infrastructure that both properly markets and executes on technology, creative, messaging, and then operations in a way that you have to be good to be able to do it. It's not as simple as calling someone on the phone or talking to someone in a video chat and having them put someone in front of you. For all you know, that's their sister or their brother or their cousin. And I've seen that happen where startup agencies out of the Philippines and other third world countries are basically a way to employ their family members, not as a way to find the very best talent for the opportunity. So I can go on and on in this episode talking about all the idiosyncrasies of our industry and our competitors to show you a way that Kayana is actually legit. But why take me at my own word when we can have a meaningful discussion with people who were there before Kayana and the idea of Kayana ever existed? It actually started with two really good friends who were in what we called the Traction Lab, where we were going to launch our ideas and help each other launch our own businesses. And I was actually working on a completely different business idea. And those two people are Milt and Gary Wong. They're not brothers. They're not family members. They're both Chinese Americans, both engineers by trade. And they ended up doing very different things with their lives. And we come together every week to talk about our businesses. And I'm going to bring this to a meeting with them and the beginnings of Kayana. So let me quickly introduce them to you before we jump in our conversation. Both Gary and Milt are engineers, and they were high school friends. Gary took his career in the direction of technology, where he built a web development company called the Spin Group, and then later on co-founded Boothie, where he's made a significant impact on how businesses leverage technology and drive growth. Gary's passion for web strategy and online marketing was always there and a huge service to his clients. I met him at the dawn of AI and had the opportunity to ride that AI wave and continue to ride that wave with him. Now, let me introduce you to Milt. Milt's an electrical computer engineer. He is the professor of digital marketing at the University of Wisconsin Madison, actually where my oldest son, goes to school. He is a proven leader with deep understanding of how technology and marketing intersect and using marketing and digital marketing to drive growth. Milt's expertise in customer service, digital transformation, and marketing automation has helped companies improve their operations and build strong, lasting connections. Just to kick this off, and I think this is very funny and ironic, but when we first got together to form Traction Lab, you guys both wanted to do a podcast, and I said, absolutely not.
Yeah, Traction Lab started out to be a forum, right, for us, Milton and I, and whoever else wants to join, to talk about how to get traction for their startup, for their company, for their marketing initiative. And we thought that by starting out as a podcast that we can get more people involved and get more interest. But obviously the hardest part of any podcast is to get eyeballs. And you brought that up. You're like, how are we going to get anybody to listen to us? So we're like, hey, why don't we just start and just do our thing? And maybe it'll evolve back into a podcast. And here we are.
That's right. So I thought it was very ironic that I would say this is a terrible idea. And here we are discovering the possible. And I'm like, I feel badly because I think now we probably should have done the podcast right away.
We had a lot of good sessions that would have been hilarious and fun to publish. Yes,
it is. There's always tomorrow. We can always start tomorrow. Milt, you've been on this journey with me, and how far back in your memory can you go? And when was that moment? It's like that moment when you tell your parents about that girl you just met. Do you remember that moment when I told you about the virtual assistant business I wanted to start? Because I don't think I had a name then.
No, you didn't have a name. It came as an outgrowth out of other conversations that we're having, because then you had made a transition from your prior adventures and you were leveraging the VA model and you were getting a lot of personal value out of it. And there's this, I certainly didn't invent this phrasing, but it's a very popular mantra in business where sometimes the business opportunity is right in front of you, because if you create a business around solving an issue or a problem that you have, then there's going to be other like-minded individuals out there that also may have similar problems, and then creating a business around solving those problems for people. So access to good resourcing was what you were experimenting with at the time, and that eventually evolved to your business idea.
Now, what was funny to me when I first started pitching you on this idea of virtual assistants, how casual Gary was about it, because he's, oh yeah, my wife has been using virtual assistants for a long time now in her business. And I felt like I discovered the new world, and here Gary's, oh yeah, I've known about that for a while.
Well, I think anybody who has used remote workers, or whether it's abroad or stateside, has some level of experience with virtual assistants, right? I used to do a lot of work. Used to hire a lot of contractors on Upwork. We used to have a different name back then. I forget what it was. And so I never thought of them as VAs exactly, right? But because the VA world is not just administrative assistants, right? It's anything that anybody that can help you with the tasks that you need to do, right? So whether it's my wife's VA, actual administrative assistants, or the contractors that we use from other countries, I think we've all dealt with getting help from people that are remote.
Was there a moment in sort of those meetings where you're like, okay, Chris is like serious about this. He's really going for it. Or like, how long did it take before you're like, okay, this is gonna happen. Like, he's really doing this. Because I think there's this weird moment in every startup's life where it's like an idea and people are like thinking about it. And there's this moment when you realize there is actual traction. When was that? Did you have that moment where you're like, okay, maybe this thing is for real. Maybe we need to start paying attention to Chris and this idea. And, oh, I guess this is not going away. Or did it just sort of happen gradually for you guys?
The original business was actually you leveraging your VA at the time for a different business, right? So connecting it back to the value, you were leveraging it and getting value out of the work model. But then you started to then experience some of the potential issues that come with the model in terms of it's a different type of work relationship. It has some tenets of like team and team building, but then not, right? And people are effectively free agent contract work. And so then what's the nature of that? If you build a working relationship, but then the original work relationship is somewhat tenuous. And so when that then was starting to impact your ability to scale and build traction for the other business idea that you had, that to me was then when you started to actually then apply your thinking to, okay, how do we build more of a long-lasting model between ultimately the clients and the VAs? So that's when the wheels to me started to turn. And one of the conversations that we've had over the time of Traction Lab that I wanted to bring to the table, Chris, was even the labeling of this is different for different people. So Gary already addressed it, right? Is the stereotype, and stereotypes are perceptions, but perceptions become real, that around the VA model is that it is purely around just administrative tasks. And so that may be one of the things that then you and your team are also addressing. Because if you said to me, virtual teams versus remote teams versus VAs versus, Gary mentioned Upwork, so that's often associated with just the gig economy, if you will. Very different perceptions of the work processes around those 3 or 4 different labels. And so I think that's even an important part of the journey that you were going through, is by labeling Kayana a VA business model. What does that even mean in this context of building a business around VAs?
Yeah. And I think that story is still being told, because I've been frustrated by the moniker virtual assistant, because I feel like it's very confusing. And in some ways, it caps people's ideas of what's possible. They come to the table with the idea that, oh, administrative this or low level that, or disposable. And that's not the goal. I don't think that's the opportunity. And I don't think it's not just not the opportunity for me. I think it's not the best and biggest opportunity for the client. And so I'm very conflicted. Now, the problem is that people know what that means now. Mm-hmm. And now there's a whole SEO infrastructure around that. And I don't know, Gary, do you have any tips and tricks for me? Can I engineer around the weightiness of how people think about remote professionals? Can I game the system and dump in a whole bunch of keywords? Probably not. I have to play along.
Well, it is a very crowded space, right? So to stick out with SEO, it is going to be an uphill challenge. But what's exciting right now for every industry out there is that's changing so fast with AI. And so reformulating and through trial and error as to how to get yourself in front of the AI search engines of the world. I think that anybody can win right now. That's what's exciting about the time that we live in right now. With how many people are using AI search already, and it just came out, right? And
Crazy.
Google is very quickly changing how they monetize off of search. nobody's figured it out yet. So it's free for the taking if you're willing to experiment. And being a small startup environment like Kayana, we can together figure things out. As we experiment, what we share is going to be beneficial not only for Kayana, but for what I do, for what Milt does. And it's an exciting time.
The biases, right? So I'll use myself as an example to connect the two dots from the two themes that we just talked about, right? There's no question, Chris, that then if you asked me, coming from my background with 25 to 30 years of corporate leadership roles, then remote work and virtual team building, regardless of whether or not I was an employee or a contractor, was just part of my DNA, right? 20 years of my background was with GE, where most of the people that I worked with on global projects were not in the same office. We're not in the same time zone, global calls, virtual remote teams, inclusive of major contractor teams that worked for me and with me on teams, was just part of the wiring. But I would have then been one of the people that then would have stereotyped when I heard about VAs. They're like, oh yeah, that's just like an important corner, but I would have categorized it as just assistant work from that perception, right? If I then match that to then the theme, unwiring that perception under normal times would take 3 to 5 years, I would say, in normal
forever,
business
really.
times, which is forever in business, right?
Yeah.
But there's long-term trends that right now are showing that 3 to 5 years of change can now happen in less than a year. And of course, talking about the obvious of the AI disruption. So the disruption that we're now seeing is going to show that those stereotypes, new terminology can get created, right? When VA, the term first got created, it took probably 3 to 5 years before that became the standard phrasing, right? We've just all lived through the last 2 years in which new terminology is getting created, right? As we talk about it.
Right. Amazing.
So if I connect that to then the overarching disrupting times is I previously would have worked with marketing agencies hired by my corporate marketing teams on SEO, connecting those dots, trying to unwire prior terminology that biases a particular industry that I was in that was outsourced. I now believe that skill needs to be insourced, where understanding that world is part and parcel to part of a business's strategy. You need to then have direct team members that understand that and the impact of the change. And perfect example of changing terminology. It's literally a meta example, Chris, of can new terms get created and influence the world? Over the past 2-3 weeks, then my podcast and newsfeed basically told me that the new terminology had arrived, right? The new terminology is not SEO, it is GEO.
What is
Generative Engine Optimization.
Oh gosh.
Right?
Is that a new acronym that we need to start using?
That is the one that has now stuck because we all know we were like, I've used this phrasing in professional terms, but now I weave it into my digital marketing class. It's who was ever going to say and use ChatGPT as a verb, right? The way that we all say Google it.
I'm going to go ChatGPT it.
I'm going to ChatGPT.
I'm going to GPT it.
It doesn't roll off our tongues. So now people were looking for these. Everyone likes acronyms because they're shorthand and terminology. And so we could have actually thought about it and brainstormed GEO because it's a direct riff off of SEO. But no one had, and then someone did. We could probably ask now who's the first person to utter GEO, but it makes complete sense. Generative Engine Optimization.
Milt, you haven't been short on crazy ideas.
Hey, Chris Nolte here. Just want to say thanks for watching part 1 of Discovering the Possible episode 3. The conversation with Gary and Milt continues on in part 2, which is linked in the card to the right. So I hope you will join me in part 2 as I, along with Gary and Milt, explore how AI is revolutionizing various aspects of their work and industries, and touch on the evolution of websites, the use of AI in coding, and the changing skill sets required in today's workforce.